Hello and welcome back to Weeknight Hero. As always, I'm your GM Evan. With how well the Basics of Combat video went, I thought it was important to follow up quickly with another Danger Room video. So, with the Danger Room going into all aspects of combat, I think it's important to discuss the key factor that hampers a lot of game masters and players when they get involved in a prolonged campaign for Mutants and Masterminds. Now, this is a concept that I found while researching other RPGs. It's called the empty field problem. So here I will be discussing what it is and some of the ways that we can avoid or beat the empty field problem. So firstly, what is the empty field problem? The empty field problem is this general concept in game design for tabletop RPGs. When a game master structures their encounters, there is a tendency, even for the most advanced game masters, to set them in an environment that is, in essence, an empty field. And the clearest way that I can put it in the Mutants and Masterminds setting is to have your big showdown with all your heroes and your villains, and you set it in what is tantamount to an empty street with no cover or concealment, with no environmental hazards or difficult terrain, and you set the heroes up to be roughly 30 to 60 feet from each other. And this is the heart of the sort of meta-critique of combat simulators and Mutants and Masterminds in particular. I've often seen in forum posts or Reddit posts that combat is either incredibly boring or it has a tendency to favor tougher characters with higher damage outputs. And all of this falls back into the same general problem, which is this empty field problem. When you remove a lot of variability in complexity to the battleground, it just becomes a slugfest. The person who can throw the most punches or take the most damage most often wins. And even your big bad evil guy can be taken down because he cannot withstand 3 attacks each round from all of your heroes. Now, this, of course, begs the question in realistic combat, why would this big bad evil guy just sit there and let himself get hit 3 times over every round while he can only do 1 attack? All of these things contribute to boring combat encounters and general dissatisfaction from the party because, at the end of the day, they can always do 1 big team attack that takes out the big bad evil guy, and the story's wrapped up nicely at the end. Why is that? Now, the heart of this problem came from a Star Wars RPG forum post about how their characters could not defeat an ATST on their own, and how they thought that made it an uninteresting or boring game. Of course, if we were to look at it in realistic terms, why would 3 people, 3 of them not being fighters, have the ability to take down an ATST? Because the game master did not provide them with a means to solve the challenge, did not provide them any cover or concealment, and always kept the ATST within easy firing range. What did you think was going to happen? The ATST destroyed the group. But it begged the question, why would they set this encounter up in such a way where the only choice was to fight or run? And if the choice was to run, what tools did you provide the players that let them know that running was an option? Think about the superhero comics or movies that inspire Mutants and Masterminds. How often is the field made up of completely blank, featureless terrain, which does nothing to show off the character's skill? Imagine if Spider-Man was fighting somebody in an empty field. How interesting is that? What can he use in order to grab onto with his webs? What can he use to jump off of? What can he use to throw at opponents to improvise his attacks? Nothing. And when you remove all of those interesting facets and don't allow the setting to influence your combat encounter, then naturally it all falls into this level of sameness. How could it not? So, what's the solution? We've already talked about why this empty field problem is such a detriment to combat encounters. What can we do to solve it? So, the first and key thing that we're going to do is game masters. If the primary conflict is combat, you should be structuring your final combat encounter with your villain, the one that teaches them that they can't stand against the heroes and teaches them that maybe their villainy isn't the right idea. Put a little more effort into the environment that they're fighting in. Look at your home or the environment that you live around. If you were to just walk right outside of your door and travel a few feet, imagine if a combat encounter, imagine any superhero, the Avengers or anyone, are fighting right outside of your door. What interesting facets to the environment could they use to their advantage? If there's a height and elevation difference, that's something that's really worth noticing. If there's a large water feature, that's also something worth noticing. Add these things to combat encounters because they flavor the environment for the players and also provide them with the tools they need to understand the conflict. Change up the environment in the scenario. If you feel it gets a little bit dull, shake it all up and then move it over to a different area so that you can use different facets of that environment in order to color the encounters. If you don't provide a reason why your strongest character can't go right up and smack the villain in the face, and he will do that every single turn, then why wouldn't they do it? It's the path of least resistance. The next step is to create perhaps maybe a script for your encounter, provide a general goal that might exist outside of direct combat that will solve the problem for them. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything like a fatal flaw or a fatal weakness like pouring water on the witch from The Wizard of Oz. It could be something like the magic ritual that they're performing requires them to be stationary. If you can find a way to move them, that's another way to solve the conflict without punching them. If they're defending an alien communication device that tells the invasion force where to land, then naturally the players would understand that destroying the device is more consequential and more pertinent to the story, so your characters might divide and conquer, where one of them distracts the villain and the other one destroys the communication device. All of these things flavor your encounters, and even these small details like having your characters fight on a rooftop, underground, with intense heat burning all around them. All of these things can change the exact same encounter and turn it into something that is more difficult because players now need to problem solve and work their way out of the conflict, but are small changes that a game master can easily keep track of that color the encounter and make it more interesting. You can play 5 of the same encounter with the same character, but if you're to change up the environment and the general purpose or problem solving of the conflict, it turns these same characters into completely different stories. But that about wraps up this video. As always, thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for our next video.